I aimed my gun with trembling hands, sweat running down my face despite the cold of the night. The wail of the squad car siren still echoed in the distance, a cruel reminder that this was supposed to be my last shift. Or at least, it should have been. 40 years serving the law, and all I wanted was to end the night signing paperwork, handing in my badge, walking out of the precinct as a free man. Instead, I was standing inside an abandoned house, facing a shadow in the darkness. His voice cut through me like a bullet. "You shouldn't be here, old man. This is your end." My flashlight caught his face, and for an instant, my legs nearly gave out. I knew that man. Or rather, I knew those eyes staring back at me, burning with hate, and something I never could have imagined. It was as if my entire past had come crashing down on me at once, suffocating my breath. The radio crackled on my shoulder, asking for my position, but I couldn't answer. Because in that instant, I realized the call I took on the last day before my retirement wasn't just another case. It was the nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My name is Richard Callahan. I was born in a small town in Texas, but it was on the violent streets of New York that I truly grew up. My father was a cop before me, a stern man of few words, but with a sense of honesty that seemed to weigh on his shoulders. He used to say, "The badge isn't a job, it's a burden." And maybe I only understood the real meaning of that phrase when it was already too late. I joined the police academy at 22, full of ideals, believing I could save the world. But the world had no interest in being saved. The years went by, and each case carved an invisible scar. Every body on the pavement stole a piece of my faith. Every grieving mother's eyes reminded me that it would never be enough. I built my career in homicide, where the darkness was thickest and the silence of the victims screamed the loudest. I became the guy everyone called when things went out of control, when no one else wanted to face the crime scene. Not because I was better, but because I learned how to switch myself off, to wear a cold mask that kept me standing. Over time, that mask began to stick to my skin, and I no longer knew where the cop ended and the man began. I had a marriage that didn't survive the weight of this life. My ex-wife used to say I was never really home, even when I was sitting in the living room. Maybe she was right. My son grew up distant, looking at me with a mix of admiration and fear, as if he already knew that one day I'd be forced to choose between the law and the family. That's the kind of debt no court in the world can judge. And still, I never regretted choosing this path. The streets taught me more than any classroom ever could. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the choice to keep moving forward even while shaking inside. I learned that justice and vengeance walk side by side, and the line between them is so thin that sometimes one wrong step can turn you into the very thing you swore to fight. I also learned that loneliness is the price you pay for carrying a gun and a badge, because in the end, no one else carries the weight of the trigger you pulled. Now, standing on the edge of retirement, I found myself questioning the legacy I'd leave behind. Would people remember me as the cop who solved impossible cases, or as the man who lost everything trying? Too, I spent 4 decades keeping the city on its feet, but I could never keep my own life balanced. The truth is, I wasn't just preparing to hand in my gun and badge. I was preparing to face the mirror without the shield that had always protected me from reality. And that scared me more than any criminal I'd ever faced, because when you've spent so long being the wall between chaos and order, who are you when the wall crumbles? That night, as I adjusted my holster one last time and felt the familiar weight of the pistol at my side, a strange feeling took over me. It was as if something was still unfinished, as if fate wasn't ready to let me go. I wanted to believe my final shift would be quiet, just a silent goodbye to the streets that shaped my soul. But a part of me, the part that never slept, that always waited for the worst, knew the city still had one last card to play against me, and I, Richard Callahan, had no choice but to accept it. The call came in at 10:47. p.m., just as I had already signed half of my retirement paperwork and was counting the minutes until sunrise. The radio crackled with a nervous static, as if the city itself were holding its breath before saying my name. Unit 3, Adam 12. We have a code 1032. Possible armed suspect. Activity in a condemned property. Sounds of struggle and childlike screams. East Sector, Red Hook, corner of Van Brunt and King. I knew that block. I knew the cracks in the sidewalk, the rusted iron on the fences, the smell of salt and decay drifting in from the docks. More than that, I knew the emptiness that lived in that house. Years ago, an unsolved case from that very street had buried my sleep. The past, I'd learned, is like a road you think you've left behind until you realize it curves and drags you right back. Central, this is 3 Adam 12, confirming response. My voice came out steady, but my hand adjusting the radio trembled ever so slightly. Dispatch fed me more information. Multiple calls. One witness reported hearing "lock the basement and she won't scream again." Amber Alert active since this afternoon. Victim's phone pinged in the area. All units, use caution. The word basement dropped into my gut like a stone. I turned the key. The squad car's engine coughed before roaring alive, like an old partner refusing to be left behind. The city slid past my windows, broken up by the rhythm of traffic lights glowing red and green. Sirens from other units flickered across. Intersections, brief flashes of blue before disappearing again. A drizzle began tapping against the windshield, the wipers sweeping in a hypnotic rhythm, and every stroke brought back the same question: why tonight? Why on my last day? The radio crackled again. Possible suspect wearing a mask. Neighbors report male voice and a second voice. Female or child unclear. Flickering light seen on the second floor. Sound of chains dragging. Chains. Basement. Mask. The words meshed like gears in a machine clicking into place, triggering every instinct that had kept me alive all these years. I made a left, swerving around a truck abandoned in the lane. My old GPS lagged behind, reluctant, as if it too didn't want to lead me there. I rolled the window down, letting the night air and the smell of oil and sea hit me. Red Hook always smelled like a tired harbor. A stray cat darted under a gate, and a group of kids stopped their bikes to watch my car pass, their silence heavy, as if they already knew the choreography of tragedy by heart. I grabbed the radio again. Central, request silent backup 2 blocks out. No sirens. Whoever was inside that house had already heard too much in life. I parked under the weak glow of a trembling street lamp, 1 corner away. The house loomed ahead, paint peeling, windows boarded shut, the number on the facade dangling by a single nail, swaying like a broken clock hand. From behind the boards, a faint, erratic glow pulsed like a heartbeat out of rhythm. I could swear I heard breathing, or maybe it was just the wind slipping through the cracks. 3 Adam 12, on scene, I whispered into the radio. Protocol demanded I wait for backup. Instinct, stubborn, seasoned, and merciless, told me that time was a luxury whoever was inside didn't have. My father's voice came back to me, sharp as ever. The street doesn't keep time, son. It bites. I opened the door quietly, the drizzle soaking my face, the cold biting into my skin. The gate on the side was loose, the lock too new for a place this ruined, the ground muddy with fresh footprints, one large firm, the other smaller, hesitant, as if dragged. The house loomed before me like a predator waiting in the dark. And as I set foot on the porch, each creak of the wooden boards sounded less like noise and more like a countdown. The clock without hands had started ticking, and I knew, deep down, it was about to bite. The street felt suspended in time when I parked the squad car a few yards from the house. The flashing red lights reflected off puddles left by the drizzle, painting the asphalt with stains that looked like fresh wounds. Red Hook always had the air of a forgotten place, but that night it seemed ripped straight from a nightmare. The wind blowing in from the harbor carried rust, salt, and something else, something sweeter, sour, and unmistakable, the faint stench of decay. I pulled my coat tighter around my chest, but the chill running through me didn't come from the weather. It came from the memories of everything that Block had already taken from me. The house loomed ahead, silent, crouched like a beast waiting to strike, peeling paint, windows covered with boards nailed in haste, a facade that told of decades of abandonment. And yet I felt eyes on me. There were no curtains, no cracks to spy through, but I knew someone was watching from inside. The beam of my flashlight trembled slightly, revealing details that deepened the unease. Fresh marks on the doorframe, as if forced open recently, a brand new padlock on the front gate, cigarette butts damp in the corner of the stairs. Whoever was inside had been here long enough to leave traces, but not enough to bother covering them. I stepped onto the sidewalk, boots striking with a hollow echo that carried louder than I wanted. That was when I noticed the silence. No barking dogs, no distant music from old radios, not even the hum of the streetlights. The neighborhood had gone mute, holding its breath as though every wall were waiting for the end of the story to unfold. The gate's iron was cold under my hand. The padlock was too clean, shining under the drizzle like an unblinking eye. But the fence sagged at one corner, just enough for someone familiar to slip through. I crouched and pressed my way inside, mud clinging to my pants as I rose to my feet. In the backyard, footprints etched into the wet earth confirmed what I already suspected. One set heavy, deliberate, another smaller, faltering, dragged. The yard was a graveyard of forgotten objects. A rusted child's bicycle missing its front wheel, a broken rocking chair, a rain-swollen rag doll slumped against the wall. Nothing belonged there, not in a condemned house. This wasn't abandonment, this was staging. A grotesque display of stolen lives, trophies laid out in plain sight. I climbed the porch stairs, each wooden board moaning beneath me like old bones. The smell shifted, sharper now, not just mold or rust. Something denser, metallic. My stomach clenched. Blood. My light swept the wall and caught dark streaks, diluted by rain but undeniable. Not stains from years past. Fresh. Signs of a struggle, only hours old. The door looked ready to collapse, swollen from years of damp rot, thin cracks splitting across the surface. Through them, faint sounds leaked out. At first I thought it was the wind, then I realized it was breathing, shallow, restrained. I pressed my ear against the wood, and for a moment, all I heard was my own pulse pounding in my head. Then, like a whisper carried through the boards, a word, maybe help, or maybe just the wind reminding me where I stood. The radio crackled at my shoulder. Backup arriving in 1 minute. 1 minute, 60 seconds that could mean salvation or a death sentence. The dilemma I'd faced my entire career returned with familiar cruelty. Wait for support and risk losing whoever was trapped inside, or step in alone and carry the ghosts of whatever I found. My finger brushed against the pistol grip, the metal cold even through the leather of my glove. I took a long breath. My last day on the job was supposed to end quietly, a peaceful farewell to the streets that shaped me. But standing there, rain dripping down my face, eyes locked on the darkness behind that door, I understood the truth. I wasn't watching the house was watching me, and it was ready to swallow me whole. I pushed the door with my shoulder, and it gave way with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. The air inside hit me like a fist, stale, suffocating, thick with mold, and something fresher, metallic, that clung to the back of my throat. My flashlight sliced through the darkness, its beam catching dust particles suspended like ghosts in slow motion. I stepped inside with my gun raised, every muscle taut, every sense sharpened. The floor groaned beneath my boots, each sound announcing me, each step a warning. Whoever was here already knew I had arrived. The size E hallway was narrow, the wallpaper torn in strips that looked like scars. At the far end, a door sat ajar, leaking a flicker of weak light, like an old bulb refusing to die. I advanced carefully, forcing my breathing steady, straining to hear beyond the thunder in my chest. That's when I caught it, the slow drag of chains against concrete, heavy and deliberate, coming from below. And over it, faint and broken, a breath, fast, shaky, like a sob being choked back. My thoughts raced. Amber alert. Child's voice. Chains. Basement. The puzzle was snapping together, but the picture it formed was worse than anything I wanted to see. I keyed my radio, my voice low. Central, I'm inside. Possible victim restrained. Requesting status on backup. Only static answered. The silence pressed tighter. I edged into the front room. My light swept across furniture draped in filthy sheets, shapes frozen like specters. Broken bottles littered the floor, catching the beam and scattering it into shards of light like dead stars. In the corner, a chair lay toppled, one leg splintered, scrape marks etched across the floorboards. That's when a voice slithered through the darkness. "You shouldn't have come here, old man." I froze. The words didn't come from any one place. They seemed to seep through the walls, crawl across the ceiling, surround me from all directions. My gun pivoted with my flashlight, but there was nothing, just silence and shadows. I forced myself forward toward the basement door. The narrow stairway dropped into pure black. My light trembled against the railing, sticky under my palm. And when I angled the beam, I saw it. Stains, dark and wet. Blood. My stomach lurched, but I kept descending, every creak of the steps sounding like the groan of something alive. At the bottom, the beam revealed a cavern of clutter. Torn boxes, trash bags split open, stacks of rotting wood. But in the middle of it all, like the eye of a storm, was a chair. Chained to it was a small figure. Wrists bound in iron far too heavy for someone so fragile. Head slumped, hair plastered to sweat-soaked skin. My heart pounded harder. I lowered my weapon slightly, stepping closer. That's when I heard it. Click. A metallic snap behind me. I froze, the sound unmistakable, a gun being cocked. The barrel pressed cold and hard against the back of my skull. "Took you long enough, Callahan." The voice was no longer a whisper in the walls. It was real, inches away, dripping with rancor. He knew my name, not from dispatch, not from a badge. He spoke it like he'd carried it for years. I turned slowly, gun still in my grip, but angled low, careful not to trigger his reflex. My light swept upward, catching his face behind a cheap mask. But the eyes, those eyes, made the ground vanish beneath me. I knew them. Before I could speak, he stepped closer, the muzzle grinding harder into my skin. 40 years you've been running from the shadow, he hissed. And tonight, it finally caught up. The girl behind me whimpered, chains rattling in panic. The radio on my shoulder crackled faintly. Back up 30 seconds out. 30 seconds that might as well have been a lifetime. My grip tightened on the pistol. Above us, the bulb sputtered, casting the room in frozen frames. Me, him, the child chained between us. 3 figures bound by pain, vengeance, and fate. And in that flickering light, I understood. This wasn't just another case. This was the night the past had come to collect its debt. The basement light flickered in short, sharp bursts, turning every second into a distorted snapshot. One moment, the muzzle of the gun pressed against my forehead glared under the bulb. The next, his eyes, furious, unblinking, burned straight into mine. I tried to steady my breathing, but deep down, I already knew this man wasn't a stranger. The way he spoke my name, the venom in his tone, it wasn't random. "You have no idea who's standing in front of you, do you?" he whispered, his mouth close. Enough that I felt his breath against my ear. 40 years, and you've already forgotten the faces you destroyed. The world froze. My memory scrambled like old case files scattered on the floor. How many men had I put away? How many faces had I watched blur behind prison bars? How many children had I seen crying behind crime scene tape? His voice wasn't just an accusation. It was history crawling back to life. He tore off the mask in one swift motion, and when I saw his face, the floor seemed to vanish beneath me. Older, harder, scarred by time, but those eyes were unmistakable. Michael Turner, the boy I'd last seen at 12 years old, screaming as social workers dragged him away from a crime scene I had left behind. The boy whose father, an arms dealer, had fallen to the ground in a pool of blood after a shootout with me. That night, decades ago, I had told myself it was just another justified shooting. I told myself I had protected lives. But staring into Michael's eyes now, I realized what else I had done. I had shattered his world. "You took everything from me, Callahan," he spat, voice trembling not with fear, but with rage, hardened by years. "My family, my home, my childhood. You left me with nothing but hate. And I swore that on your last day you'd feel what I felt." My chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. The boy I thought I had once saved had grown into the man who now held my life in his hands. And behind me, the child in chains whimpered, every sob slicing through the air like broken glass. Michael glanced at her and smiled a cold, cruel smile. "Beautiful, isn't she?" His voice dripped with malice. "Do you know who she is? She's the daughter of the district attorney, the one who covered for you that night, the man who buried your mess under red tape and kept you clean. She's the payment. And you're the reminder." The words hit harder than the barrel against my skin. This wasn't just revenge on me. This was vengeance against the entire machine that had shielded me, the system that had allowed me to walk free while others buried their dead. He wasn't just attacking Richard Callahan, retired cop. He was dismantling everything I had believed I stood for. "It's simple, Callahan," he hissed. "You choose, her life or yours. But someone doesn't walk out of this basement." I turned my eyes to the girl, her gaze wide, pleading, trapped in silence. Then back to Michael. I didn't just see a criminal. I saw the boy I'd left, broken on the pavement, the child who had grown up carrying a hatred heavy enough to smother any chance of redemption. My instincts screamed to act, to save her, but my heart twisted with the crushing truth. I wasn't just facing Michael Turner. I was facing the consequences of a lifetime of choices. The wail of sirens reached us, muffled but closing in. Blue and red lights seeped faintly through the cracks of the boarded windows. Michael pressed the gun harder against me, his voice sharp with fury. "If they come through that door, everyone dies. This is between you and me." The basement shrank around us, walls tightening, air suffocating. My pulse thundered in my ears, and then the cruel truth crystallized. This call on my very last day in uniform was no accident. It was the debt I'd been running from all along. And tonight, the bill had finally come due. The cold steel of the gun pressed against my forehead weighed heavier than 4 decades of carrying a badge. Michael's face, lit in jolts by the flickering bulb, was like a warped reflection of my own life. In him, I didn't just see a criminal. I saw the boy I had abandoned to the system, the orphan carved out of violence, the living embodiment of every ghost I tried to bury under case files and commendations. And in that moment, my worst enemy wasn't him, it was me. My mind dragged me back to that night so many years ago. The firefight, his father's gun flashing, my reflex pulling the trigger, the dull thud of a body hitting the floor. The silence that followed, broken only by a child's scream echoing in the dark. I had told myself then that it was justified, that I had done my duty, that the law had demanded it. But looking into Michael's eyes now, filled with 40 years of venom, I could no longer cling to that lie. Maybe I had saved lives that night, but I had also destroyed one. My throat tightened, breath catching in shallow gasps. I asked myself the question I'd avoided for a lifetime. How many times had I fought monsters only to create new ones in the process? How many times did I trade innocence for order and call it justice? The truth cut deep. Michael wasn't an anomaly. He was proof. Proof that the thin blue line I clung to wasn't just separating chaos from order. It was blurring into it. Behind me, the girl whimpered, her chains rattling with each sob. Every sound from her was a blade twisting in my chest. I had to save her. That instinct, that oath, was still alive in me. But Michael's words gnawed at me. Maybe I was just perpetuating the same endless cycle. Kill to save to kill. If I pulled the trigger tonight, I might free her, but at what cost? Another broken boy, another ghost, another chain I'd never shake. Memories came at me in shards. My ex-wife, accusing me of being absent even when I was home. My son's eyes, caught between admiration and fear, asking me why I always had to leave armed. My father's voice, stern, unyielding. The burden of the badge is carried to the grave. And then, above them all, the image of young Michael, tear-streaked, trembling, watching me drag his world into ruin. That boy had grown into the man with a gun against my head, and I couldn't tell if I had made him, or if I had simply let him happen. The radio crackled faintly at my shoulder. Back up in position, awaiting your signal. But I didn't answer. Protocol couldn't save me here. This wasn't a matter of tactics or procedure. This was a reckoning 40 years in the making. My grip on the pistol slipped with sweat. For the first time in my career, I asked myself if I even had the right to fire it anymore. Not because I doubted my aim, but because I doubted what pulling the trigger would make me. Hero, executioner, maybe both. Maybe I'd always been both. The uniform had given me a script to justify it. But in this basement, under Michael's gaze, I saw the truth stripped bare. Michael leaned closer, his voice low and jagged. Now you understand, Callahan? Now you feel what I've carried. The weight of deciding between innocence and guilt, between killing and letting die. Welcome to my hell. And I realized then that this wasn't just about saving the girl. It wasn't even about surviving the night. It was about facing myself, 40 years of choices, regrets, blood, and silence. My hands shook, not from fear of death, but from the unbearable weight of conscience. The dilemma wasn't whether to save her or myself, it was whether I had the strength to finally break the cycle, or if I was doomed to become the monster I'd spent a lifetime fighting. For the first time in my life, I didn't know if I had the courage to make the right choice. Time had stopped in that basement, stretching every second into an eternity. The girl's breath hitched in desperate sobs behind me, the chains rattling with each tremor of her body. The muzzle of Michael's gun pressed into my chest, heavy as judgment itself. I knew then there was no tactical maneuver, no protocol, no backup that could decide this for me. The choice was mine alone. I stared into Michael's eyes, and what I saw tore me apart. Not just the hatred of a man, but the pain of a boy I had once left behind. Those weren't the eyes of a predator alone. They were the eyes of someone who had been shaped by the violence I carried out in the name of justice. I had faced hundreds of criminals in my life, but never had I looked into a face that reflected my own failures so clearly. "You're going to choose, Callahan," he said again, voice steady, almost calm. "Her life or yours, but somebody pays tonight." My thoughts spun out of control. I could try to move fast, disarm him, fire first. I'd done it before, quick, decisive, efficient. But each memory of pulling that trigger came flooding back, dripping with ghosts that never left me. Each time I saved a life, I destroyed another, each victory written in blood. I couldn't do it again. I was tired of living as the man who killed to protect, tired of convincing myself it was always for the greater good. I drew in a long breath. For the first time in my life, I lowered my weapon. My arms felt like they weighed 100 pounds, but I let the gun slip from my grip and fall to the rotting floorboards. The sound of it hitting echoed like a muted shot. Michael's eyes widened for an instant, his hand trembling just slightly. "If it's my life you want, then take it," I said, my voice raw but steady. "But don't touch her. Don't turn her into another version of you. Don't steal from her what was stolen from you." The bulb flickered overhead, and for a moment I thought it was over, that he would fire, that this was the final page of my story. The barrel dug harder into my chest. I closed my eyes, feeling the cold metal burn into me like a nail driven home. I thought of my son, who might never understand. I thought of my ex-wife, who would only get the news in a phone call. I thought of my father's words, "The badge is a burden you carry until the end, and realized I was finally ready to set it down. Then I heard it. Michael's breath faltered. A ragged, broken sob escaped him before he caught it. He staggered a step, yelling not at me, but at himself, as if he were fighting against his own skin. You don't get it. You think it's that simple. I took a cautious step back, my hands raised, my voice softer now. No, I do get it. More than you think. You believe you're alone in this pain, Michael, but I've been bleeding out for years, too. I just had a badge to hide behind. You think hate kept you alive, but it's been killing you since that night. The girl's sobs grew louder, cutting through the tension like knives. Michael turned to look at her, and for a heartbeat his mask slipped. I saw not the man, but the boy again, the child who lost everything in one gunshot. His eyes flicked back to me, filled with torment. Outside, sirens wailed closer, red and blue bleeding through cracks in the boards. He snapped his gaze toward the sound, panic flaring. If they come in, it's over, he growled. I nodded. Then end it with me, but let her live. We stood there, locked in a silent duel of wills, my hands empty, his grip trembling. And for the first time in decades, I realized the fight wasn't over life or death. It was over whether either of us had the courage to stop the cycle. And in that fragile moment, as the world closed in, the decision began to tip, not toward the trigger, but toward something far harder, the choice to let go. The silence shattered before the decision fully settled. Outside, the sirens died down, replaced by a calculated stillness I knew all too well. Backup was in position, ready to storm in. My hands were still raised, my gun lying on the floorboards, my eyes locked on Michael's trembling figure. Sweat ran down his forehead, mixing with tears he tried to conceal behind a mask of rage. The pistol in his hand was no longer just a weapon. It was an anchor, dragging him deeper into the abyss. Behind me, the girl sobbed louder now, her cries echoing through the basement. Every sound from her tiny lungs felt like it was tearing the air apart. Michael turned toward her, then back to me, his face splitting between torment and fury. He looked like three people at once. The wounded boy I left behind, the broken man who had returned, and the predator fighting to hold them both together. The radio on my shoulder crackled again. Unit 3, Adam 12. Status? Awaiting your go for entry. I didn't answer. I couldn't. A single word could turn the entire basement into a grave. Michael sensed my hesitation, stepping closer, shoving the barrel against my chest until I felt it thud with each heartbeat. You think lowering your weapon fixed anything? His voice was jagged, splitting between anger and despair. You lived your whole life with a shield. You killed with it, hid behind it. I had nothing but hate. And now you want me to believe there's another way? I swallowed hard, staring him down. If you kill her, you prove that hate is all you ever were. But if you let her live, if you stop here, you prove there's still something human left in you. That boy I saw all those years ago, he doesn't have to die tonight. The words hung in the air, thick and electric. Michael's body shook, and for a second I thought he'd explode. Then, with a guttural cry, he hurled the gun to the ground. The clatter of metal against concrete roared louder than any gunshot. In an instant, the world erupted. Doors crashed open, boots pounded downstairs, flashlights cut through the dark. Shouts filled the room. Police! On the ground, hands where we can see them. The chaos was immediate, controlled, relentless. Two officers tackled Michael, slamming him against the wall, cuffing his wrists with brutal efficiency. He didn't fight back. He just sagged against the bricks, chest heaving, eyes hollow. I rushed to the girl, my hands fumbling as I unfastened the chains. Her wrists were raw, her face pale, but when she collapsed into my arms, she clung with a grip that felt stronger than steel. "You're safe now," I whispered, though the words rang hollow in my throat. Safe didn't mean whole. Safe didn't erase the trauma of what she'd lived through, but it was all I had to give her. A hand pulled me back. "Detective, you okay? We can take it from here." I nodded numbly. My eyes drifted to the weapon on the floor. Michael's gun. It gleamed. in the flashlight beams, mocking me. A single pull of its trigger and the story would have ended differently. Cleaner, faster, simpler, but not better. Michael was dragged past me, cuffed and silent, his gaze locked on mine. No fire left, just emptiness. As he crossed the threshold, his lips moved low enough that only I could hear. This isn't over. Outside, the night erupted with the chaos of police chatter, camera flashes, neighbors whispering from windows. The girl was wrapped in a blanket, rushed to an ambulance. I stood on the wet street, the drizzle cooling my face, but no relief came. There was no triumph here, no victory, only aftermath. The captain clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Hell of a way to finish your career, Callahan." His attempt at levity fell flat. I shook my head, staring at the darkened windows of the house behind us. "It's not finished," I muttered, my voice hoarse. "It'll never be finished." Because the immediate consequence wasn't the arrest, the rescue, or the headlines that would follow. It was the hollow truth carved deeper into me. I hadn't defeated anything. I had only survived one more night. And some debts don't close with handcuffs. They linger, and they wait. I was the last one to step out of the basement. The night air hit me like a wave of ice, but it brought no relief. The street was flooded with flashing red and blue lights, radios buzzing, reporters already swarming behind the barricades. The girl was being lifted onto a stretcher, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her face pale and streaked with tears. For a moment the chaos faded, and all I could hear was her voice, weak, trembling. "Sir, officer." Her eyes searched for me, wide and unblinking. The paramedic hesitated, then stepped aside to let her speak. I approached slowly, kneeling by her side. Her small hand shot out, clutching my arm with surprising strength. He said you would save me, that you had to choose." Her lips quivered. "Why didn't you shoot him?" The question hit me harder than any bullet. I could have given her the easy answer, about crossfire, about risk, about waiting for the right moment. But I knew that wasn't what she was asking. She wasn't asking for tactics. She was asking for truth. "Because I've spent my whole life shooting," I said quietly, my voice hoarse. "And every time I did, I lost a piece of myself. If I had pulled the trigger again tonight, you might have lived. But you would have grown up believing that violence is the only answer. I couldn't let that happen to you." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but they weren't tears of fear. She just nodded slowly, as though she understood something far deeper than her years should have allowed. That was when I heard my name, shouted from the police car where Michael sat, handcuffed, waiting to be taken away. Against the protests of the officers, he leaned forward, his voice sharp, cutting through the night. "You think you won, Callahan? You think you broke me? No. You just proved what I always knew. We're the same. The only difference is that you had a badge to hide behind. I only had hate." I didn't answer. I let him pour the venom out, but then his voice faltered, trembling with something else. "When you dropped your gun, for a second I wasn't this. For a second I was that boy again, the one who cried for his father, not the one who swore vengeance. You stole from me the only certainty I had, that I would die hating you." The words struck deep, heavier than his weapon ever could. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't surrender, it was something crueler, the confession that even in his darkest hatred I had left a fracture, a place where he remembered being human. I stepped closer, speaking low, just for him. "You may not see it now, Michael, but throwing that gun down was the first different choice you've made in 40 years. Not for me, for her." I tilted my head toward the girl in the ambulance. "And that's what will haunt you, not me. The proof that you're still human, whether you like it or not." His eyes burned, but he looked away, unable to hold mine. The officers shut the door, and the car pulled away, carrying him into the night. I turned back. The girl was still watching me from the ambulance, her expression softer now. She whispered almost to herself, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Those words cut through the noise of sirens, the flashing lights, the chatter of officers and reporters. Simple, pure, and heavier than any medal I had ever been given, because in them I found the only redemption I would ever know. That conversation, those few words from a child and the broken man who had once been one, changed everything. They didn't erase the past. They didn't silence the ghosts. But they gave me something I hadn't felt in years, the possibility of meaning. And as I stood in the drizzle, the city's chaos swirling around me, I understood. This night wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of my reckoning. My redemption wouldn't come in headlines or reports. It would come in how I chose to live with the truth. And for the first time, I believed I might actually try. The silence after the storm is always louder than the storm itself. When the street cleared, when the neighbors shut their windows and the reporters were pushed back, I stood there under the drizzle, feeling the weight of what had just happened sink deep into my bones. 40 years of service, dozens of shootouts, hundreds of cases, and it was on my very last night that I finally learned the lesson I had spent a lifetime avoiding. I wasn't just the man who hunted monsters. I had helped create them. Back at the precinct, I sat at my desk for the final time. The coffee was cold. The typewriters clacked faintly in the distance. The air smelled of paper and gun oil. It all felt sharper now, as if life wanted me to memorize every detail before tearing the badge from me for good. I picked it up, staring at the dull metal. Just a piece of steel, scratched and worn. But it carried 4 decades of my existence. It had been my identity, my shield, my pride. But it had also been the wedge that broke my marriage, the wall between me and my son, the reason I had become a stranger in my own home. Michael's words replayed in my head like a verdict. You hid behind that shield. He wasn't wrong. For years I had used the badge as an excuse to justify my choices, to rationalize my mistakes, to believe I was always on the right side. But the truth was sharper. The line between justice and destruction had blurred long ago, and more than once I had crossed it. How many Michaels had I left behind in my path? How many broken lives came as collateral damage to the order I swore to uphold? But then I remembered the girl's eyes, the way she looked at me, not as a killer, not as a failure, but as the man who had refused to give up on her. In her gaze there was no hatred, only fragile hope, and that fragile hope became my only redemption. I couldn't erase the past, I couldn't bring back the dead, but maybe, just maybe, I could spend whatever time I had left trying to live differently. I thought of my son, of the years lost between us, of the questions I never answered, of the silences that grew too heavy to break. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I could show him that courage isn't found in pointing a gun, but in facing the ghosts you've tried so hard to bury. Turning the badge in my fingers, I understood something I had never dared to before. My father was wrong. The badge isn't a burden you carry until the grave. It's a responsibility you hold for a while and then you let it go. The mistake is believing it defines you forever. Without it, I wasn't nothing. I was simply a man, left with the choice of who I wanted to be without the armor. That night, before leaving for the last time, I stopped in front of the locker room mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't the young recruit full of fire. It wasn't even the cold, hardened detective I had become. It was an old man, scarred, worn, who finally had the honesty to admit his fragility. For once, I didn't look away. I let myself see every line, every scar, every shadow, not to punish myself, but to accept that they were mine. The transformation didn't come like lightning, nor like some divine revelation. It came like a whisper. I still had a choice. I could spend my remaining years drowning in guilt, or I could use them to try to repair what little I could. Through small acts, through honesty, through humility, I had never allowed myself before. I walked out of the precinct without turning back, the cold morning air washing over me like a late baptism. I was no longer Detective Callahan. I was just Richard, a man free of the badge but not of his past. And maybe that was the real meaning of retirement, not stepping away from the law, but finally learning how to serve life. Dawn was already breaking when the case was officially closed. The preliminary report sat on the captain's desk. Suspect apprehended, victim rescued alive, no officers injured. On paper, it was the kind of ending most cops pray for. A clean operation, a child saved, no blood spilled on the uniforms. But for me, who had lived every second of that basement carved into my chest, those words rang hollow. Bureaucracy can flatten horror into neat sentences. Reality never does. The captain called me into his office. The curtains reeked of stale smoke. The light overhead buzzed, and for a moment I felt like I'd been pulled back into one of the countless briefings that had defined my career. Only this time, there was something different in his eyes. He studied me quietly before speaking. "You could have fired Callahan. You could have ended it in a heartbeat, but you didn't. What the hell happened down there?" I turned toward the window, where the first rays of sun crawled over the skyline. My voice came out low, rough. "I've spent my whole life pulling the trigger, and sure, I saved lives that way, but I destroyed others too. Last night I realized if I fired again, I'd be feeding the same cycle that created him in the first place." The captain let out a long breath, rubbing his temples. "You were always one of the best, but you were always the most stubborn too." He reached into his drawer and placed a small wooden box on the desk. Inside, a medal gleamed. "The mayor wants this handed to you today, a retirement honor. But looking at you now, I know this isn't the reward you're walking away with." I took the box in my hands, but I didn't open it. Medals had lost their meaning. What I carried out of that house wasn't metal and ribbon. It was the weight of 2 pairs of eyes. The terrified eyes of a girl who clung to me as if I was the only safe thing left in the world, and the hollow eyes of a man I had helped create. That was my real burden. Later that morning, I returned to the scene with the cleanup crews. The house was ringed in yellow tape, forensic techs moving in and out, cameras flashing behind police lines. Reporters shouted questions, but I gave them nothing. What could I possibly say? That justice had prevailed? That the system works? I had no illusions left to sell. The girl had already been taken to the hospital. Before she left, she gave me one last look from the back of the ambulance. She didn't speak, but her eyes held a quiet understanding, deeper than words. That look was worth more than any commendation I'd ever earned. Michael, meanwhile, had been transported to major crimes. The officers told me he was silent the entire ride, staring out the window, somewhere between past and present. His arrest wasn't a victory. It was just another chapter of pain, unfinished and unresolved. When the last officer pulled the tape from the gates, I stood alone before the house. The rain had stopped, and the morning sun struck the rotting facade, illuminating every crack and scar. It looked less like a crime scene than a mirror, reflecting back all the damage I carried inside. By noon, I turned in my sidearm, folded my uniform, and left my badge on the clerk's desk. The metal glinted under the fluorescent light, and for a second, I swore I heard voices in it. Victims, suspects, fallen partners, all the ghosts I'd collected. I brushed my fingers across its surface one final time and walked away. The city logged the case as a success. The headlines would read, "Child rescued, veteran cop. Retires." But I knew better. What happened in that house couldn't be packaged into neat lines of text. It was the closing of one book and the opening of another, one written not on reports, but in the shadows that would follow me. When I stepped out of the precinct, the sunlight spilled across the streets I had patrolled for 4 decades. There were no cheers, no parades, just the same indifferent city, humming as if nothing had happened. And maybe that was right. The city had never belonged to me. I had always belonged to it. And now, for the first time, I was free, walking without a badge, but with scars that would never heal, carrying the memory of a night that would never let me go. The sun was already high when I walked out of the precinct for the last time. The metallic thud of the doors closing behind me wasn't just the end of a shift. It was the end of a life I had carried for 40 years. I stepped onto the sidewalk feeling like a stranger in my own city. No applause, no ceremony, just the hum of traffic, the stench of gasoline and smoke, people rushing past with no idea of the ghosts that walked beside me. And maybe that was exactly how it should be. The city doesn't need to remember its guardians. It only needs to keep breathing, surviving, moving forward. That morning, I sat on a bench by the river. The wind carried the brine of the water and the cry of gulls overhead. I pulled the badge from my pocket, the one I hadn't turned in. A small, battered piece of metal, scratched from years of use, but heavy with all the lives it represented. For a moment, I thought of throwing it into the river, letting it sink into the black water and disappear like the memories I wished I could erase. But I couldn't. That badge was part of me, as much as my scars. It wasn't something to bury, it was something to remember, because forgetting would only mean repeating. I thought of Michael, the boy who lost everything in a single gunshot, who grew into a man defined by hate. To the world, he'd always be just another criminal. But I knew better. He was a consequence, a reflection of choices I made, of lines I crossed. I didn't choose his path for him, but I had paved part of it. That truth didn't destroy me. It transformed me, because admitting the truth, no matter how ugly, is harder than pulling a trigger, and maybe it's the only path to real change. Then I thought of the girl, her eyes filled not with fear, but with gratitude, her whisper, "Thank you for not giving up on me." That was what redemption looked like, not in medals, not in headlines, but in one fragile life spared. In that moment, I realized my greatest victory wasn't in the cases solved or the criminals caught. It was in a single heartbeat that kept going because, for once, I chose not to repeat the same bloody cycle. My greatest lesson came late, but it came. Courage isn't just facing danger, it's facing yourself. I had spent years believing the badge made me just, that the law excused the blood on my hands, but the truth was merciless. Justice isn't a piece of metal or a set of rules. Justice is humanity, lived day by day, choice by choice, and it demands more strength than any gunfight ever could. Now, stripped of the badge, I understood my fight wasn't over. It had only changed. I no longer carried a weapon, but I carried words, I carried stories, I carried the duty to speak the truth of what I'd seen. Maybe my legacy wouldn't be of a hero or a villain, but of a man finally brave enough to confess, because the line between good and evil was never out there, on the streets. It was inside me all along. I rose from the bench, slipped the badge back into my pocket, and started walking, not to escape the past, but to use it as a map. My steps were heavy, but they were free. I didn't know how much time I had left, but I knew how I wanted to spend it, as a better father, as a more honest man, as someone who could finally admit that the law without compassion isn't justice at all. And so I leave this, not as Detective Callahan, but as Richard, just a man. If you carry a uniform, a title, or any symbol of power, never forget the lives it represents. Those lives will hold you accountable one way or another. My reckoning came on my last day. Yours may come tomorrow. If you've stayed with me through this story, I ask you this: don't let it die here. Share it, think about it, and ask yourself what kind of legacy you want to leave. And if this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what part spoke to you the most. Because in the end, medals and reports fade. What endures are the stories we carry. And this one, this is mine.